Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Don't forget to subscribe to Check Call, the newsletter on FreightWaves.com if you haven't already. Today we welcome back the one and only Thomas Wasson. Thank you so much for joining us today, Thomas.
Oh, pleasure to be on. I'm back. I'm excited. I've been traveling and stuff. I may have more information. Who knows? We'll find out.
So, Thomas, from your tales, for those who may not have been following along on FreightWaves.com, which is fine, I'm not going to judge you, but on a side note, there's a really great series of articles that have recently come out on FreightWaves.com about the non-domiciled CDL holders, and it's like a big thing. Break it down for us. What's the issue? What are people all up in arms about?
So, non-domiciled CDLs, it's part of a larger CDL trend. So the long story short is on social media, whenever rates get low, small fleets and owner-operators get really angry. And so we had this problem back in 2020 when the COVID had its first bump. Well, now rates are still poopy again because the party's over and we're picking up the scraps. And so we're seeing a lot of times you'll see focuses on things that are trying to take capacity out of the market. One of those that people are latching onto is the non-domiciled CDL. So let me put on my Bill Nye the Freight Science Guy hat and first explain what is a non-domiciled CDL. First, it's a CDL. You still have a CDL. You still passed the test. Somebody gave it to you. Non-domiciled means that you just don't reside in the state. Now, way back in the day, non-domiciled meant that, let's say Thomas lives in Tennessee, but he works in Texas. Most of the time of the year, maybe I'm in Texas, but my CDL residency is in Tennessee. That's called a non-domiciled CDL. Thomas is working in Texas, but on his little driver's license, it says Tennessee. Fast forward all the way to NAFTA, and that's where this really starts getting fun. The non-domiciled CDL starts extending to people in other countries. Like, let's say Thomas is from Ireland, and he comes across and says, well, I have an Irish CDL. I would like to get one in the US. Well, I still have to have residency. I need a green card. And so I show that I can work here with a work permit, and then the state DMV is like, all right, Thomas, well, you got some utility bills, you're living here, you're allowed to work here, go take the CDL test, we'll give you one. Ta-da, here we are. So for everyone to do, I'm going to put a pause in a moment, but this is what we're talking about. So when everyone talks about non-domiciled CDLs, it can mean foreigners or it can mean people who live in other states. Being the United States, it can be other states within the United States.
Okay, so that seems relatively straightforward, that, it's people that's something that we see all the time. I mean, you see over-the-road truckers or over-the-road drivers that go literally from coast to coast, and they don't rarely drive in the state that they live in or that they call home or they have a mailing address in. But there has been some controversy with it, and it's all started in Arkansas. Do you mind kind of breaking down why our Arkansas is more or less like the hub of, or like the kind of the
nexus?
Like, yes. Thank you. I was like the Kickstarter. Why is Arkansas such a big deal, and why has it caught, honestly, national attention?
I'll do you one better. It actually started by way of Texas, but just like FreightX in most communities, they're habitually late. So I did the research on this, and it did start. I spoke with the president of the Arkansas Trucking Association. If you don't know, the ATA is both a national organization and a collection of state organizations. The reason being is because the FMCSA in their infinite wisdom is like a mob boss. They say, look, we set the big rules, but every state is like a capo. We will give you funds for your goons to enforce things, but you can't go over what the Don says. And so that's kind of how we need to view state and FMCSA regulations. So Texas, way back in 2020 during the days of the pandemic, they noticed something. I spoke with Texas Department of Safety officials. They noticed that there were a bunch of random trucks and stuff chilling out around in encampments. And that's not an uncommon thing. Texas has a lot of labor. Texas is building things. Anyone goes by Houston, they're just building stuff everywhere nowadays. And so they started looking at what kind of CDL holders they are. And so this all began because they noticed there was a bunch of Mexican CDL holders. And it's called an LSP, like Licencias Federales something, LSP. We're going to call it a Mexican CDL for my listeners because LSP is just way too much right now for everyone. I'd had my second cup of coffee. So they started digging in there and they noticed there's an alarming trend. These Mexican CDL holders were not where they were supposed to be from. So my favorite story from this is called "How Are the Beaches in Guadalajara?" A lot of them are duolingual. Texas DOT officials, a lot of them speak Spanish and English and other languages because, newsflash, Texas is on the border with another country. And so they ask these folks, they pull out their little license and they say, "Hey, where are you from?" They're like, "I'm from Guadalajara." And they're listening and they're like, "Man, you sound like you're from like El Salvador or Honduras." And like, "No, no, 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 I'm from Guadalajara." So the officer goes, "Okay, you're from Guadalajara. How are the beaches in Guadalajara?" And then the driver gets a big look of excitement on his face and he says, "Well, I love the beaches. I take my wife there all the time. We walk the beaches in Guadalajara. Beautiful place. Truly, you wouldn't believe it. The beaches are superb, stupendous." And then the officer looks at him and goes, "Well, I'm unfortunately, I have some bad news. There are no beaches in Guadalajara." And then the driver's like, "Well, you got me. I gave $2,500 to somebody. They printed me out a fake CDL. They put me in the system. And yeah, I didn't actually learn to drive. I just kind of have this." And that normally wouldn't be a problem, except that we recognize Mexican and Canadian CDLs because of NAFTA. So that's what began this story, was Texas decided that you need to have a work permit, which means you need a non-domiciled, like a form of permit, or if you're from another country, a non-domiciled CDL. So because they can't make a Mexican CDL non-domiciled, and you can't get a 1099 to show you're legit, they're like, "Well, you know what? We need one extra thing. We need you to provide a green card or a work permit, because we know that the Mexican stuff is screwed. You can bribe a guy to put you in the same system that shows you're legit because we share your system." So there's a whole area of fraud. Fast forward. Well, under the Biden administration, the FMCSA threatened to pull Texas's funding. Texas told them to pound sand. FMCSA was like, "Okay, bro, I'm going to back off, but I still don't like you." And then fast forward to the current thing in Arkansas as ATA. They hear from Texas saying, "Look, this is a problem. These guys are going to start doing weird, sketchy stuff in your states. We're cracking down, but Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and some of these other places, it kind of moves up." And so that's where this all began. Now, there's a place called American Truckers United, or ATU. They're former Arkansas ATA members. And so one of the big challenges is, the big irony is we originally mistakenly reported that the ATU was first. Well, it was actually Arkansas Trucking Associations that was first. It's dueling bills. And so when we're looking at this kind of drama going down, you just have to understand that both competing bills were looking to penalize folks who didn't have permits, and if they couldn't speak English or do something else, they're looking to take capacity out of the market. The ATU in particular, they had like a $5,000 one. With the Arkansas folks, the biggest goal is like, we need to figure out who you are, just like counting fish in a stream. How do you know if they're healthy or not unless you pull a few out? And then we need to make sure that there's a basic level of enforcement, which in this case, English language proficiency. So that's another point. We're going to hit pause for a minute because I'm cooking for a minute. We're going to digest this. But you got to understand it's like dueling banjos. There was an ATU-backed bill, an Arkansas ATA-backed bill, and the Arkansas ATA won because they have a little bit more connections, and the ATA, that's kind of their thing in terms of the state legislature. Much to the people on FreightX and social media, they'll get super, super frustrated. That's just how the sausage is made. It takes a few years. You know, you can't just rage bait posts of foreign drivers and suddenly expect you're going to meet your legislative priorities, especially if you have a private LLC and not a nonprofit. There's also disclosures and stuff you have to get around. So it's a lot easier to post on the internet and rile everybody up with anti-immigrant sentiment than it is to do the actual work.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting though that like the thing that, because like you talk about the enforcement part of it, and that's kind of hard to do, especially if you're like, oh, I maybe have to enforce things with people that like I can't just go to an office and be like, "Hello, what you doing? Are everything cool here?" Because that's not really like an option that you can do with a driver of a truck that is all over the place. But why has like the English language proficiency fallen to such a central component of it? Because you have to speak English to get a CDL in the United States. So is it just kind of like, does that work with the non-domiciled? Like why is that the center point of this?
Well, It used to be you'd have to only know English, but there's a patchwork of states, and each state DMV can make the rules on the test. So some states allow you to have Spanish interpreters, some states allow you to take a Spanish version of it. It's definitely something where you, because of since 2016, English language enforcement has dwindled. And the reason it's dwindled is something called out of service, or OOS for short. Out of service means that I cannot let you drive until you fix something. Normally, out of service, in terms of English, in every other instance, is like your brake light's out, your headlight's gone. Call somebody and fix it, and then you can drive again. English language proficiency, prior to that memorandum, was your driver can't drive because he can't speak English. You need to come pick it up. And so that's why this is becoming a big thing, because the real teeth of the matter was putting back in out of service and then having enforced through the CBSA. Now there's a three-parter to this for enforcement and what this means. One, people will tell you that this is a mass capacity event and all of this other stuff, and it's going to fundamentally change the market. I say, ha ha ha. How do we know that? Because you have to catch them. Unlike a lot of these jokers, I have worked law enforcement and I loved hunting poor people in cars. You have to speed and break the law though, because when I'm looking at a car or a truck, I can't tell, unless you have in big bright letters saying I don't speak any English, whether or not I can pull you over for an English thing. You can't, kids. And so the enforcement mechanism has to be a three-way thing. Drivers will tell you on social media, well, the scale houses will get you. No, they won't. That's why you're a truck driver, and that's why I'm paid to be a market analyst. Because if your CSA score is good enough, you bypass the scale house. You ever wonder why you don't magically just get pulled in there and it just says a green light? Well, that's why. Your score is good. So you can have an entire carrier of non-English speaking bros driving around, and if they're safe, the system won't just magically pull them in. Well, what about an enforcement blitz? Let's pull every single truck. Good luck. There's not enough. You ever try damming? You ever try putting in the Tennessee River a big old net? It's a lot of work, and you're just going to clog the whole thing up. You want to clog up some interstates? Let's clog up some interstates. So the enforcement aspect is one of the big things. There's three ways to do it. The CSA scores and stuff, it's going to take a while because you have to stop them. Accidents and putting them out of service is another one, and that's what you're seeing on social media. Every time an accident happens, people are asking, oh, did he speak English? They want engagement. So just understand this is engagement farming. Doesn't matter if you speak English or not, there's a fundamental problem with CDLs that we're glossing over because drivers are frustrated at carriers who are working cheaper than them. I'll say it again, that way we can get a clip. The reason there is a focus on English language proficiency right now and not the overall issue of unqualified drivers, regardless of your race, creed, or gender, is because they want less capacity, fewer drivers, and they're mad that rates are low. That's like me yelling at Adam Smith for creating the laws of supply and demand. I'm sorry, that's just how the game is played. So I want you to pay close attention to all of this because it really frustrates me. There are more important tasks, which is why is it that the CDL system is currently allowing for unsafe drivers? Why are there third-party schools that are basically not being audited and allowing unsafe drivers on the road? What are we doing to address those things instead of playing whack-a-mole every time an Amazon or some other truck plows into somebody on a Texas interstate? It's really frustrating for me, and I have a lot of gripes about it because there's a responsible way to do it, and then there's a clickbaity, I need engagement, look at me, ha 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 way, and that appears to be the current discourse.
That's the one thing I don't like. I have gripes with the internet because it like brings people together and it creates all these conversations, but then it just becomes like a void to yell into, which is not always the most productive and helpful in these conversations. But I mean, it like enforcement, like you said, it is the tricky thing. And also, I mean, look, if you're going to try and stop every truck on the road, they try that during Blitz Week. And we all know that people just like don't do that.
So here's what we can do. I actually have a solution. I talked to Texas.
Oh, yes.
So I went on my travels and I spoke with some former Texas DOT officials because apparently Texas does a pretty good job at this in terms of enforcement. Step one, you remember back in the day, you just deputize somebody and give them a deputy sticker. Well, in law enforcement terms, that's called a memorandum of understanding, an MOA or MOU, an MOU, memorandum of understanding. So what Texas department officials did was they first worked with Highway Patrol. Highway Patrol is normally the ones who loves to go after truckers and they work accidents, at least in the state of Tennessee. But they also decided to start partnering with local, state, municipal, and even the Texas Rangers about how to help enforce this. How do you do that? A memorandum of understanding allows them all the sticker. They're deputized in the eyes of the law, and they know what to look for. Because it's one thing to say you can pull them over for this. It's another thing to make sure the officers are trained on what to look for and conduct these tests. And so if we're thinking of the DOT, Secretary Duffy, they're working on addressing this. It's a monolith, so they're going to try to go after non-domiciles first. I understand why, because there may be some bigger issues. It's like finding cockroaches in your favorite buffet. We've just found a roach. There's 100 of them somewhere. But enforcement will have to come from a framework. And the tricky part is, since it's because of the states, remember the mob boss and the capo rules with how FMCSA and regs go and CVSA? You got to figure out how to get local law enforcement involved to do it. A lot of times giving them a cut or giving them incentives, police departments are funded by taxpayers, but it's expensive, especially if you crash a few cars. And so finding ways to get them involved in the enforcement aspect is going to be getting you where you want to go. Right now, given the current capabilities of enforcement, we will see an uptick. We will see thousands of trucks potentially being placed out of service, because that's what it looked like in 13 and 14 when we last had some good data. But at the same time, the big question is, it's like Goldilocks. What's the right amount to take out? Or even better, I'm going to throw a wrench in this argument just for the sake of the argument. They may be so scared that they just stop driving. The threat of enforcement is another thing we cannot measure. We will just see it later in the data. So there's a whole, I guess the biggest thing I want folks to take away from this, because I've talked about 5 different points on this thing instead of just one, which is, oh, there's a bad accident. This driver is a bad man. There is a complex and nuanced situation that is being ignored currently in the discourse, because we're all just mad that people are running loads for cheaper. And that's it.
I mean, we saw that with the broker transparency rule that the FMCSA is currently reviewing the comment period. I mean, that started in 2020 when people were thinking that when brokers were making so much money and there was all of this like highway
too
robbery
much money. Small fleets were pushing brokers because of 2020. Yeah. When the market crapped the bed, they said, those fat cats, they're taking it away from me. And we actually saw that push, and it took 5 years because government takes a while.
Well, also, like, the FMCSA, does this federal motor carrier safety on the highways and rates the broker transparency. I'm not going to lie, it's not necessarily the most high priority when it comes to highway safety. I can think about 24 other things that are slightly more important. But there's always going to be fussing. There's always going to be, well, it's because of this. It's because of this. It just becomes a blame game when the market turns. So that being said, if this enforcement comes through, if they start saying, okay, well, we're going to start doing this and more than just, we're going to start cracking down outside of like a select few states, do you see it removing a significant amount of capacity from the market? Or do you see like, okay, well, if you're a 3PL or freight broker that uses maybe the same, like heavily like the same large carriers, or you have a dedicated fleet, do you see that affecting that at all? Or is it just kind of on those one-off loads?
It will impact brokers. Brokers are more exposed to small fleets and owner-operators who are using these drivers. I worked at US Express. I didn't have problems with English language proficiency. Large mega carriers do not have this issue because for decades they have been not cutting those corners. They're too big. They can't really get away with it. Smaller fleets, yes. The thing for brokers, because this is a broker podcast, is that think of your highways, RMIS, and all your carrier assures and stuff. You're adding an extra wrinkle when you're booking loads to your compliance aspect. Now, instead of not only does he have enough inspections, is the vehicle safe, does he have a lot of accidents, you have to try to figure out, is he going to be okay with English proficiency? Because the biggest oopsie daisy, because I was a freight broker as well for a stint, so take that, nerds, I can talk crap both ways, is that if you get some 2-bit brokers who have their drivers pulled over and they booked a crappy carrier because they want to make their $50 rip and he gets stopped, you risk losing your customer because your customer doesn't want to have somebody who can't speak English, and then it becomes a headache for the broker. And there's a lot of talk on social media about, well, shippers don't worry, shippers update it, but At the end of the day, as a broker, your word is your law. You're only worth as good as your thing. And so that's going to add an extra wrinkle, because how are you going to validate every driver? How are you going to put in the highway that every single driver speaks English? You're going to call every driver? You're going to call them up. Let me talk to every driver and let me give them a phone interview before I book this load. How are you going to do that? So there's a big wrinkle for brokerages because they're on that bleeding edge. And so that's what the question, we don't know yet. Now, if we hear brokers start struggling, and we hear a lot of anecdotal evidence, we're going to have to keep our ear to the ground. But that's one of the big questions and the unknowns, is because it will impact the brokers who work with small fleet and owner operators to a outsized extent than it will. Also cross-border, because a lot of those cats are dual lingual to begin with. Cross-border and nearshoring is another area. Matt Silver, or the other one with Cargado gentleman, one of the Silvers. I'm sorry, Mr. Silver. You guys are good people, but Cargado Silver talked about the outsized impact, and that's one of the other people you want to pay attention to, is to see the impacts of that. Because normally it used to be, for these cross-border moves, it used to be before some changes in the mid-2010s, that you were stuck at the county line. So it was okay if you didn't speak English in the eyes of the DOT, because you're not going past the county line. I swear it's like some old, old 50s buddy cop thing. Oh, you're all right, just stay out, don't go north of the county line. Nowadays, they can go all the way in the U.S. as long as they find a load back. So that's another wrinkle that we are going to have to figure out. What does that mean for a Mexican carrier running automotive stuff through Laredo, door to door to like a Kansas City? How's that going to work? Are they going to get stopped? Because a lot of times it's really hard to just enforce them. So there's a lot of unanswered questions. And I'm going to give you one more thought experiment, because, if we hear arguments, we have to take them to their logical conclusion, or I'm not doing them a service. Let's imagine we get rid of all non-English speaking drivers. Thanos, they're gone. Everyone speaks English. You know what the problem's going to be? We're going to be back where we started, because the drivers are unsafe because the CDL system's broken. Then you know what they're going to complain about? They're going to find another thing. They're going to say, well, this type of driver working for this company, he's undercutting my wages. He's working for this, he's leasing his truck and I had to buy mine. That's not fair. So the reason I want to circle back to this point is because there are fundamental issues. The well itself. It's like having an animal carcass upstream, and we're mad that the water tastes funny, but there's some bigger issues. It's kind of like that with English language enforcement. I'm glad that folks are addressing it. Safety on the roads is critical. Reading road signs is critical. These are important things. I'm always pro-safety. Also, I'm really hard on carriers who don't do their jobs right and they run crappy equipment. I'm coming for you next. But at the same time, it's a disservice and it is irresponsible to try to specifically single out one group when all groups are guilty. That's right, I'm the freight judge Dredd, and you are all guilty in the eyes of the law by cutting corners and not running safe. And just the fact that you're paying your drivers less, that is a symptom of a much larger problem.
I like it. I'm here for Thomas Judge Dredge. And I'm guessing if anyone has spicy commentary, or if they, want to get a part of Thomas's hot, spicy takes, I'm going to go ahead and assume that your DMs are wide open.
Yeah, they're going to, usually the largest ones you're going to get is, well, you don't care about the drivers. You don't support the drivers. Oh, I care a lot. It's just, I'm not going to agree with your take on it, because I don't get paid whether you succeed or not. I get paid the same. So you know where I come from. I don't get a cut or anything. I'm an observer who has done these roles in dispatch. And the other thing they'll say is, well, you hadn't been a driver before. And I was like, well, I don't have to be a driver. I don't have to be a sous chef to manage a bunch of restaurants, because at the end of the day, it's about making money. And if you're not making money and being profitable, same with freight brokers. At least I was a freight broker. So, oh, yeah, I've been in my job before. Oh, I have. I've dealt with some idiots who are like, well, let's just book this carrier. They're a little sketchy. They'll work out. That's going to go away. So we're going full circle right now. We got a little bit of time left. The biggest takeaway for listeners is, in the brokerage space, English language proficiency is an additional wild card. The only time trucking really gets shaken up is when regulatory changes. The fact the FMCSA is looking to do this and they are going to examine it is a big deal. But do you know what also the big deal is? How long will it take? How successful will it be? And will we actually know if it made a difference or not? Because right now, it's you and I could get an MC number and sit on it for 6 months. It's really hard to tell. The other final irony is going to be identity verification. That may actually be the most important thing other than English proficiency. Because like your TSA, you got to upload a picture of yourself and you have to validate that you're real. The funniest part of this joke would be, it's a bad joke all around, is that if more carriers are cut off because they simply couldn't validate their home address as a business, then it would be all the work we spent making sure Jose can read a stop sign.
I like it, Thomas. I like it. Like you said, we are running out of time, but we gotta get your hot and spicy takes on some questions around here. We've asked you quite a gamut of questions, and today I'm gonna hit you in the spirit of 4th of July and the nation's holiday. It's barbecue season. So, Thomas, what is the ultimate hot dog topping?
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
I can pick anything.
Whatever. Like if you were in front of like the biggest buffet ever, what would be the ultimate toppings that you're like, this will make the perfect hot dog?
I'm gonna need a bigger bun. I'm gonna say, everyone says chili. I'm normally a chili dog kind of guy. Some will say mustard, no mustard relish. I'd like to see a Brunswick stew on top of that beast. That's like a modified chili. It's got like everything in it. You gotta go all like, you gotta glaze up the glizzy, so to speak. And so start with that as a base, or do some super bougie, like maybe some pork shoulder or something. Put some barbecue, make it like a fusion hybrid glizzy. I'm thinking like hardcore
So a
outside.
stew barbecue hot dog?
Yeah.
That's choice.
That's the top, just came off of my head. If you had to like sit me down and like I thought about it, I'd definitely have a cool answer. But I'm thinking like, fusion. Just break the rules.
I mean, there's a hot dog place by me that does macaroni and cheese with bacon bits on top of a hot dog, and it's pretty good.
Now, I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess if anyone's got any logistical solutions for how to put a New Brunswick stew on top of a hot dog, where can they find you outside the show?
Check it out. FreightWaves.com/loaded and rolling. If you want to talk about truck tech, autonomous, and less spicy takes and more fun stuff, truck tech, FreightWaves.com/truck tech. I got episodes. I rode in an autonomous truck recently. It was super cool. They named them after NASA astronauts. That's right, folks. That's the preview. That's what you really want to hear. Autonomous robo trucks. I don't need them to speak English because they don't need language.
They just need ones and zeros. All right, Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure. I'll be back on soon.
You can find Tech Call the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcast and Spotify. Don't forget to check out all the other incredible FreightWaves shows, and don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter on FreightWaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.